Well, good afternoon. Happy Friday, November 14th. Mark Milam here, your mortgage professional. Pretty busy week and some good news that the government shutdown has reached its end. The longest government shutdown in the history of the United States coming to an end this week. And we'll start now to re-engage or reset all of these federal workers, including people at air traffic control. I'm sure the Thanksgiving holiday travelers are going to be glad to know that everyone in the government is going back to work. But what's really interesting is the economic reporting. So, we lost a lot of time here from the beginning of October through almost the middle of November. We've had zero economic reporting out of the federal government, save one consumer price index report. It's not looking like we're going to get much of this data retroactively either. It doesn't look like we're going to get an October jobs report. Very important. It looks like we're just going to pick up with November and start to digest new information as we move through the latter half of this month and into next month. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. A lot of signs pointing to a weaker labor market, lots of layoffs, reduced hiring. Perhaps we're going to see a rising unemployment rate, and the effect that that might have on interest rates will be fascinating. One thing we do know is that on October the 29th, when the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell spoke, he poured a lot of cold water on the idea that the Fed might cut the Fed funds rate in December, which was contrary to the indications that we got from the Federal Reserve dating back to mid-September. So mid-September, we were told there were likely going to be two rate cuts to close out the year, one in October, one in December. At the October meeting, the Fed said that the December cut was not a foregone conclusion and that in the absence of economic data, you slow down, meaning probably not going to cut. He used the analogy of driving in fog. And when you're driving in fog, what do when you don't have clear guidance because you have no economic reporting? You slow down. And so ultimately, what this has meant, is that futures traders are now pricing in just a 45% chance of a Fed rate cut at the next meeting on December 10th. Let's look at some historical data on this because 1 month ago, it was a 94% chance. 1 week ago, it was a 67% chance. And today we find ourselves with about a 45.9% chance that the Federal Reserve is going to cut the Fed funds rate in less than 4 weeks on December the 10th. And this one is going to turn interesting because the past several Fed rate cuts, on the day of the cut, mortgage rates have actually risen because the cut was so telegraphed, and then the Fed's language might be a little more hawkish than one might expect. The market doesn't perceive that well, and because the cut was already baked into mortgage rates, we actually see mortgage rates rise when the Fed is cutting. That is kind of how it's gone here of late. This one may be different. If the Fed does actually cut on December the 10th and the market's not necessarily expecting it, or at least hasn't priced it in, then we might actually see mortgage rates improve. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But for now, the odds of that Fed rate cut on December 10th are starting to get worse and worse and worse. I do think there's a chance that that might change based upon the economic data that's going to get reporting. Next week is a light week. You don't get a lot on the calendar next week. And of course, the following week is Thanksgiving, but then we're going to pick up back in real time with some of the BLS reporting out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let's shift gears and talk about two other things that happened this week, both of them out of the FHFA. The announcement that the FHFA would start to consider the idea of portable and assumable mortgages. Portable meaning your mortgage is no longer tied to a specific piece of collateral, that you could take it from one property to another property. And while that sounds good in theory, when investors underwrite loans, they underwrite them not just to the credit profile of the borrower, they underwrite them to the collateral that is supporting the loan, right? The actual property itself. So this is a fundamental change in how mortgages would be underwritten. I don't think there's a very high likelihood of it happening, but it sounds great to everyone who currently has a 2 or 3 or 4% mortgage. Listen, no one's going to be able to go back and retroactively make a mortgage that's already closed portable. That's not going to happen. It sounds good on a social media post, but in terms of reality, there's a lot to work through there that would fundamentally change how mortgages operate in the United States. And you'd be hard pressed to think that we can maintain something like a 30-year fixed term with a portable mortgage. That is not likely. Those two things would ever go together. The other announcement, of course, was the 50-year amortization mortgage. Some people have supported this move, saying it would lower the cost of housing by several $100s. And who cares about the amortization schedule? Because no one stays in their home 30 years or 50 years anyway. Others, however, have widely panned the idea, saying that you're essentially doubling the amount of interest that one would pay over the life of the loan. And if you look at the amortization schedule over the first 5 or 6 years, you're going to be accumulating very little equity in your property. This article that I found out of Politico magazine says that the president got sold a bill of goods and that White House insiders are furious with Director Pulte over the 50-year mortgage idea. They go so far as to say the Federal Housing Finance Agency director talked the president into suggesting the 50-year mortgage plan. In fact, on Saturday evening, last Saturday, Pulte arrived at President Donald Trump's Palm Beach Golf Club with a 3x5 poster board in hand with a graphic of former President FDR below the 30-year mortgage and Trump below a 50-year mortgage with the headline, Great American Presidents. And about 10 minutes later, President Trump posted the image to Truth Social. Almost immediately, aides were fielding angry phone calls from those who thought the idea was bad politics and bad policy. So perhaps the FHFA director, which the FHFA is the overseer of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, perhaps under a little bit of heat and a little bit of fire from White House insiders, at least according to that article from Politico. If I can be of any service to you over the weekend, don't hesitate to reach out, mark.milam at highlandmtg.com. Have a good weekend.